I think even with the tools, they're still very difficult conversations. So like,
Sure.
I think we are skillfully using a lot of tools of good communication. I think there's a couple of levels to this that we've worked through. The base level, as you alluded to, is like we are under an extreme amount of demand, right? Our kid has a ton of demand on us. Our lifestyle currently has a ton of demand. And so treading water represents not blaming each other. That's like step one, right?
Very. Welcome to the Do You Feel Heard podcast, a production of Helping the Herd. Helping the Herd is committed to empowering individuals to liberate themselves from the patterns that keep them from creating their ideal life. If you like this podcast, visit helpingtheherd.com to find resources and personalized coaching to empower you to be your best self. Welcome, everyone, to the Do You Feel Heard podcast. And we are back with one of my favorite guests, Jay Vidyarthi. Thank you so much for coming back, man.
Yeah, I'm excited. Let's dig in.
Yeah, let's jump right into it. So, in our last conversation, I had, communicated that I really wanted to open a discussion around parenting and the responsibility as a father. I'm a father, and how do we approach parenting in a mindful way, in a way that, in our society would almost go against the grain of what we were just talking about, which is like the accepted reality that, well, both parents have to work, which means the kid has to be somewhere, someone has to be caring for and watching that child and educating them. So we'll just outsource that responsibility to, best case scenario, I guess, a private type of school. But in most people's realities, it's a public school, which is state funded. Government decides exactly what your kid is going to prioritize and what's best for them, what direction they should go, and keeping everyone at the same pace. So many things, sorry, so many things in that. But that's really the decision that is really difficult to make. And for some people, not a decision at all, because there's not a choice in the matter. They have to work. And so their child has to be in regular school. And so, yeah, man, I'm very excited to crack open this egg and let's see what's inside. So, anywhere you want to start? I mean, how old is your child? Let's start there. How old are your children?
So I have one child, he just
One child.
turned 7,
Just turned
and
7.
he's neurodivergent. So I actually fit in the category of not having a choice, but less so because, of economic reasons and more so because like there's only certain environments he'll tolerate. And
Mhm.
there's a lot of challenge that he has in social situations. And then also, I've been reading a lot about neurodivergence and how we think about, for anyone who might not be familiar with that term, it just refers to like the different neurotypes would refer to the different types of brains and nervous systems we have. And in fact, the majority of our society and systems are designed for what you would consider a neurotypical brain and nervous system.
Mhm.
And someone who has a neurodivergent nervous system is atypical from the norm, but they're not necessarily broken. They're just different. But where this sense of like maybe different ability or even disability comes from is the fact that there's a challenge in interfacing with systems that are not designed for those brains. And so school is a great example of that.
Mhm.
And so in a lot of ways, we don't have a choice because of that particular difference, making school in particular very difficult for our son.
So, are you comfortable sharing specifically what you are referring to by like neurodivergent? Like, in what ways have you experienced or have you observed your son being neurodivergent, different than the typical?
Yeah, so I think around 3 or 4, we started to see some categorical differences. I don't think we really were paying attention to them because everyone's different and people have different interests. But when I look back on it, our son had like very advanced language ability and like ability to spot patterns. And he would get into these sort of passionate interests around some specific area. So, for example, trains or bus routes,
Mhm.
which is really kind of amazing. Like at one point, he was really into playing this bus game where he would kind of run around the yard and make people like wait at stops and go pick them up or whatever. And so we were doing this all the time. We were going outside. First of all, he had just like insatiable need to do this. He just needed to do it. He would be like really cranky unless someone would go out and play the bus game with him.
Okay.
And at one time, I'm playing the bus game with him in the yard, and then it kind of dawns on me that he was 3 or 4 at the time. He's doing all the stops in order of the bus route that is near our house, and we've only taken that bus like once or twice, and he's doing them all. And I was like, he's just learning to talk. And so that was kind of one reason where I was like, something's up here, but that's like a very positive. We're like, ooh, he might
Yeah,
be really smart.
prodigy.
And the we start to send him to preschool and to daycares and stuff, and he's constantly getting like removed from these environments
Mhm.
because he gets dysregulated, sometimes hits other kids, like can't seem to interact in the way that the other kids are just kind of falling in line with each other. And so we end up kind of with the burden of like, okay, well, we have no preschool, we have no caregivers, extended family can't seem to take him without it turning into a debacle.
Mm,
And so we start taking on a lot more of the kind of burden. We eventually go through the like, once the school issue happens, we start to go through the diagnostic route. He's gotten a whole number of diagnoses because of the different ways things present. But I would think of him as simply on the spectrum.
okay.
And I think a lot of other acronyms and alphabet soup that people might attribute to him are really just a product of being on the spectrum in a world that's not designed for it. So, for example, you could see some anxiety patterns, but as opposed to thinking of him as like having anxiety, I think anxiety is a pretty natural response to being on the spectrum and forced to go to a neurotypical school. So I
Sure.
don't think of that as a kind of disorder. I think of it as a kind of healthy response to
Mhm.
being different and kind of being pushed into situations where you're not accommodated, if that makes sense.
No, that definitely makes sense. It's similar to the idea of all these children being diagnosed with ADHD because they can't sit at a desk for 8 hours of their day with minimal breaks and learn things that they're not really interested in learning. You know,
Yeah,
it's like, of course, they're going to be a little antsy. Who wouldn't be, right?
yeah.
In that environment, given the circumstances. So
And
yeah,
I do think of like maybe this is useful for someone out there, like where I'm at right now, like my vantage point is I think of like a good metaphor for these diagnoses is kind of like they're like passports in a way that like, the earth exists, borders are not real, but they
sure.
are real. They are like a reality of like, if I want to go 500 kilometers south of where I am right now, I have to cross a border.
Hmm.
And I have a passport which declares something about where I am and gives me permission to cross that border and get access to what's down there based on all these kind of human made concepts. But I really do need access to that. And
Yeah.
similarly, like I think with the diagnoses, things like ADHD and ASD and dyslexia or anxiety or whatever, like I think I've come to the point where I don't necessarily think of them as like actual descriptors of people because our science is so blurry on this stuff. But I
Hmm.
think of them as passports to get access to certain services and to very quickly have, for example, a teacher understand at least a certain different script on how they need to approach. So whether the kid in your example has ADHD or not is less relevant to me about than whether they need the ADHD passport to
Hmm.
have a teacher look at them and teach them in a certain way. And that's how
Sure.
I've been thinking about it.
Yeah, I think that's great. Yeah, I think the harmful viewpoint or the harmful perspective to take is, well, this is who I am. This is a part of me forever. This is going to hinder me. This is going to limit me. This is why I'm not like others or as good as others or any of those kind of framings I think would be harmful versus what I'm hearing you say, which is essentially that it's almost like a we'll use the passport for the ADHD thing. It's not so much that there's something wrong with this child, but this is what they're experiencing. So know that, understand that this is their experience, and then you can approach them with that understanding and try to give them the support they need to get them wherever they're trying to go.
That's right. Whether they need a certain approach in just how you play with them or how you teach them, whether they need certain therapies or supports, certain medications to interface with the
Hmm.
neurotypical system that we live in. Because I also don't think it's that useful, especially when we're talking about kids. I think adults can make their own choices and be more activist. But with kids, we do live in a world of systems that are designed for certain types of nervous systems and brains. And if you lie outside of that, you're going to need some additional supports and accommodation in order to interface with that.
Sure.
I recently was actually talking to my mother about this, and I was using this metaphor of blindness, where it's like if you're blind, there's a huge challenge in interfacing with the modern world, and you have to figure out, new ways and new approaches to like get to the grocery store and do these types of things. And you need support. If everyone were blind, though, the world would simply look different,
For
right?
sure.
But you compared, so it is a kind of nuance because there is a disability there. There's an ability that typical people have that the blind
Mhm.
person does not have.
Mhm.
There is a disability there, but there's also a sense of like accommodation being required specifically to interface with systems that aren't inclusive to blind people.
Absolutely.
And what I was trying to explain to my mom actually was like, because it's such a complexity with extended family, it's very difficult to understand how to relate to these kids. Was this sense of like, it's not really about, um, y- you know, the blindness is like an obvious, visible. If you saw me holding the hand of a blind kid, your immediate response wouldn't be like, you shouldn't hold his hand. You should discipline him. You should be hard on them so
Yeah.
that they can learn how to see. But when it comes to kids on the spectrum who might be like socially blind,
Yeah.
that's actually the larger response that we get from friends and family, the extended world, when they kind of witness what we have to do as parents.
Mhm.
They'll be like, you're spoiling him. You need to just be harder on him and force him to like go to school so he can learn to see. And I'm
Yeah.
kind of like, yeah, maybe like the first 3 months I thought that because I was still in denial.
Sure.
But I spend every day with this kid, so I'm at the point now where I'm like, I see very clearly the differences, and it's not him choosing to not socialize. That is not
Mhm.
what's happening. I think another great metaphor for this, that I've kind of started to use to communicate with this particular frame. I actually used this with a school administrator a couple of years ago, maybe a year ago. Um, there was this sense, hey, why don't you just force him to go to school every day? He'll get used to it, right? And I'm like, first of all, obviously we would do that if we could because that's what we want, but that's like telling a marathon runner, like, "Why don't you just run to the end?" Like, wouldn't that get you to finish the
Yeah, or the
marathon?
golfer, just hit it in the hole right away, like,
Yeah,
first shot.
yeah.
Why
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 didn't
wouldn't
you
you
think
just
of
do
that?
that?
Just put the
You ever
golf.
thought of
Yeah, you
that?
haven't put the golf ball in the hole, right?
Just 1 shot. Why putt? What are you talking about?
So that was, like, frustrating, but as I was thinking about how to communicate, I was like, okay, so let's take a look at the behaviors that this child or a child on the spectrum is showing in the classroom. Maybe they're yelling, they're screaming, they're running, they're hitting, who knows? They're not engaging. Now, take any typical kid, send them to that school, but we're going to put a couple of things on them to like replicate an autistic experience of school. So, number one, we're going to put hearing aids in their ears and make all the sound twice as loud. So
Mm,
you're already in a classroom of 20 kids, and
mhm,
now you're hearing it twice as loud. Okay,
yeah,
now we're going to put special glasses on them that make everyone's face blurry.
mm.
So you can't really see what facial expressions people are having. Now send that kid into class and then tell me they're not going to have a hard time. And
Or make
for
them just
every,
figure it out. Just keep
oh,
going.
oh,
Yeah,
yeah,
every
just keep
day. Just keep
right.
going. You'll figure it out. You'll be fine. Like, how much more messed up would they be in that dynamic than having accommodations so that they feel safe and,
Exactly. You nailed
yeah.
it. Exactly. And that's where, what tends to sort of happen with that mentality is sort of like, you sort of need to be tougher. Like, oh, when I was a boy, no one gave me these accommodations. So, but I think that comes from a place of like, oh, these kids are resilient and strong and they'll figure it out. And that is true.
Mhm,
At the same time, you know, humans learn with the right level of challenge. And when you're different in certain ways, the right level of challenge might look very different in some areas. And so the term that I have come to appreciate the most for our son, and I know there's a lot of kids that fit this bill out there, is this term called twice exceptional. Have you heard that before?
no,
So it refers to these kids who have two exceptions to the typical system. One exception might be some sort of like learning differences, like ADHD or social emotional regulation. But the other exception is that they're really sharp in some area,
mm,
like they're like gifted for language or for math or reasoning. And what makes these kids particularly challenging, and our son is like this, is that he goes to school and not only is he socially overwhelmed and has challenges emotional regulating, he's also bored to tears by the lessons because he's already thinking a couple of years ahead in terms of math and language. And that just contributes to even more dysregulation because he's bored and it just spirals out of control. So you kind of end up in this really challenging situation where you're like, okay, we have to kind of manage both the exceptions. And some of the leading thinkers in this area will point out that a lot of schools will be trying to address the behavior, but not trying to engage the gifts. And in fact, sometimes engaging the gifts is what brings the behavior down. And that's something we kind of deal with every day. But one of the challenges of it is that that hypothetical person who's like, you just need to tough it out, they see the gifts like, oh, this kid is really, really good at poetry, let's say. They're clearly very talented and gifted. Therefore, we shouldn't be needing to accommodate them in other areas. I mean, they're clearly
Yeah.
advanced.
Right.
They'll figure it out. And I'm sort of like, in some areas, they're actually regressive, and in other
Right.
areas, they're advanced. And that kind of spiky profile gets really hard to manage. So, yeah, that's kind of our situation a little bit, and what we've been dealing with. And that's really been broadening out to affect like my wife and my life in general and the way we approach career and life in general right now.
Sure. Yeah, yeah. Thank you for sharing. It definitely brings up some of the
Yeah.
criticisms that I think are pretty widely understood, but maybe not, around just standardized schooling and like the no child left behind idea of like everybody's got to be here. Everybody is going to have the same bare minimum expectations. We're going to hold everyone to the same standards, but we're all different. Like every single person is different in their own way, and like I think that framework for education of, well, we'll just hold everyone to the same standard. Everybody's going to be the same is really, I mean, when you lay it out and zoom out a little bit, that's a pretty terrible plan. It's really
Yeah.
not. It's not really, applicable to what our current reality is, which is that people are so diverse in so many ways, and the spectrum is vast. I mean, there's so much on the we're in, and undiscovered in a lot of ways. Like we don't know that much. Even just about the human mind, the way the brain works. We're kind of like we're still monkeys using a stick to pick up ants in the terms of our understanding of the human mind and the human body and how things work, and why does this shift happen in some and not others. There's still so much we don't understand, but we're making big decisions, broad stroke decisions of how everyone should be handled, how everyone should be taught, how the environment that across the board, I mean everyone, the vast majority of our country's children are being educated with the same framework, the same system. um and it
Yeah.
just, yeah, I think what you're speaking to just highlights the shortcomings of that approach.
Yeah, because it's not I think the kids that are on the wider ends of the spectrum are pointing to an issue that affects all kids,
Mhm.
which is that we really, if we had a strengths-based approach and we really understood, like, my wife likes to say, like, if you look at adult life, right? And you think about the people you know and the people in your extended family and your friends and coworkers and colleagues, right? You can so clearly see different types of brains with different gifts and skills that,
Mhm.
in best case scenario, have kind of found their lane and found their position, but in many scenarios actually haven't, and have like spent, decades plus or possibly even their entire adult lives like banging their head against let's put it this way, like putting a square peg in a round
Right.
hole,
Right.
and just like feeling down on themselves until they, eventually find a round hole and they're like, oh, a square hole or
Or
whatever.
maybe not even a round hole. Maybe it's like an octagon. They can kinda get in, they can get
Yeah,
through it, but it's not really meant for them. It's not ideal for them.
exactly right. So, and I think when you boil that back down to education and you think about all of those adults were once kids, and you think about who gets what kind of education and who's going to excel in different scenarios, right? It's like, and like my kid's in grade one, like go
Mhm.
into any grade one classroom. And here's like the rub of the solution that we can't find because we have limited resources and limited scope, and parents have to work and can't help it. But let's just not be of two minds about the ideal world, which is that the ideal world is someone is trying to understand each of these kids and helping them, find the education plan that is sort of tailored to their unique need and gift. And it's going to look really different for every single kid in that classroom. And meanwhile, you kind of have a status quo that's sort of like an average education that is,
Right.
kind of failing to engage some kids, overwhelming other kids, and really kind of serving a very small group. within
Yeah.
that.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
it's just like, well, how do we get around that? I don't know the answer to that, but I can tell you right now, a few months ago, we moved our son to a different specialized school. It's still pretty rough. It's not going super smooth in terms of his independence and ability there. But I mean, what time is it now? It's 11:30 right now, so he's probably in the language period, which he doesn't really enjoy. But they might be playing chess with him or something. They might be just like, hey, let's just or even sending him onto the iPad to play chess, like not
Mhm.
like YouTube or whatever, but like
Sure.
he has an app called Brilliant where he learns electrical engineering concepts. And you know what I mean? Like that stuff is really engaging to him right now. And we're stuck in this hard place because I would love to just spend the whole day sitting there teaching him science. I love science. He loves science, but I also have to work. And so I don't know what the direction forward is for the school system in general, or especially for these kids that have unique gifts and needs.
Mhm.
But it is really a hard thing to wrap your head around, I think, as a parent, to just be like, I have to do my best for these kids. And I feel like I have very limited tools to do that, you know?
For sure. I'm curious, I wanna get your thought on something. So, when it comes to, like, I always think of, like, there are some people who maybe you could say teeter on both sides, or on, like, have one foot in this dimension and maybe another foot in another, right? Maybe they're aware of things that other people aren't aware of, and almost like, I feel like in, maybe a few centuries ago, that, like, this child would have been an oracle, right? They would have been like, whoa, this person, like, they know things that no one else knows. Like, we need to, like, really, like, put them on a pedestal and care for them and make sure they have everything they need, because there's something special about them and different. Whereas now it's pretty much the opposite. It's like there's something wrong with them, put them on a short bus, they'll stay in the same classroom all day. Like, we don't have time for them. They're not going to be a good worker. They're not going to be a good contributor to society,
Yeah.
the 9 to 5 capitalist thing. So they're kind of an issue. They're kind of a burden. Let's just stick them over here so we don't have to deal with them. But what I'm curious to know your thoughts about, or hear your thoughts about, is like, when you think about, like, I really like the example when you're talking about your adult friends. When you look at an adult, especially if they're, like, aware of themselves, or if you're aware of those type of, like, personality types and traits, but, like, you can see, like, oh, this person has, very Capricorn energy. They're
Mhm.
very grounded. They're very, like, determined about things. Whereas this person, maybe they have a little bit different, different style of showing up in the world. Or, like, a great example in my life is, like, my partner. She's an incredible artist, and she looks at everything through the lens of an artist, or maybe not everything, but, like, she has that viewpoint of the world, whereas I'm that Capricorn person. So I'm like, no, that's a plant. That's a flower, whatever. Like, no, no, no. But don't you see how the light and how it's doing this thing? And, like, when you think about it as adults, it's like, yeah, of course, everybody's so, they have their own way of doing things. But then for some reason, when we put our perspective on children, no one's asking what their human design is, what their Enneagram is, what about their astrological placements, which, I mean, whether it's woo woo or not, I mean, I've seen a lot of correlation between how somebody moves through the world and that type of information. Enneagrams, personality types, their main astrological signs. So, like, do you think, like, what do you make of that? Do you think that would be something that we as a society maybe ought to be putting more energy into, and understanding them from a young age? Last question before you answer. Sorry, before you answer it. There's another thing. Are you familiar with iridology?
No.
So this is a crazy thing to explore. I'll send you a link. I interviewed a guy on a previous podcast that I was doing, but essentially, the iris of your eye has these little squiggles. It's almost like a little. I don't know the names. It's been a while since that episode, but if you watch it, it'll answer all of it. But anyway, basically, there's this science that says that if you take a picture of a child's eye, that iris will be the same when they are 90.
Mm.
And so if you look at there's like a map, it's almost like reflexology, right? Where, like, the
Yeah.
foot, it's a whole representation of the entire body. Whereas with the iris, it's the same thing. It's just showing you areas within your body that you're susceptible to. Maybe, like, you don't have the strongest constitution, right? So
Mhm.
maybe you might have some gastrointestinal things, or maybe you might have skin things or whatever. But allegedly, the science can determine that from the jump, from childhood. You have a blueprint that this human has brought with them into this world, that if you looked at it, you might say, oh wow, they're going to have bone issues. Let's modify their diet and their lifestyle now to support them in the areas that they're going to need support. And if we applied that same logic to their personality type, their enneagram, their human design, whatever, maybe that could upholster, you know what I mean, like uplift them and bolster their ability to succeed in the world because of who they are and who they're coming into the world as, you know? What are your thoughts
Yeah,
on that?
for me, so I have training in science. And so when we talk about things like irisology and reflexology, like I have a little skeptical voice in my head who's like, okay, well, let me see that science. And like, I
Mhm.
feel similarly about human design and Myers Briggs and stuff. Like Myers Briggs in particular, I've looked at the science and it hasn't been very compelling to me. But what I will say is I also believe that there's a limitation in terms of science. Like science it probably the most incredible tool that humanity has ever created is science. It is a tool of thinking. It is seeking great explanations. That's like what science is about. And some people like to be almost positivistically scientific, where they say, oh, everything should be evidence based and data driven. But that's not true. That's not how science works. Like Newton was a genius, but he had beliefs that led him to explore his ideas that so there is obviously room for beliefs and leaps of faith and intuition as a part of this. The question that I'm hearing within your question, which is like, we can talk in the language of reflexology, we can talk in the like personality assessments and cognitive behavioral therapy and the neuroscience of the brain, we can talk in mindfulness terms of awareness and clarity. And though that happens to be like kind of my native language around this stuff. But whatever language we're using, whatever your belief system, the question that I'm hearing within your question that I would resoundingly answer yes to is that what I'm seeing is that like by closely observing and trying to understand the uniqueness of children and able to finding an ability to sort of educate and work with them from a point of understanding them feels like a very, very strong direction forward for parents to really internalize. And you can kind of take it from me because I'm doing that with weights on, right? Like I've
Mhm.
got such a challenging situation trying to bring my kid into these systems of society. And I can very clearly, and have gone off this ledge too, but I can very clearly see how one might default to that forcing mind mentality, which is like, listen, kids go to school, you got to go to school. There's a version of me in some other dimension that
Mhm.
when school wasn't working out, that I was like, listen, I'm putting my foot down. You need to go to school. But I think what the literature on autism particularly reveals is what that creates is something called masking, which is where people who are neurodivergent pretend to be neurotypical as a survival strategy. And everyone masks to some degree. But for these people, it takes so much energy because of their unique faculties that by the time they become teenagers, they have severe mental health issues, anxiety, depression, self harm, because they're basically living a lie. They're not allowed to flap their hands and to do all the things like climb on the furniture and all the things that they naturally want to do
Right.
because everyone has just sort of beat that out of them in a way. But instead, what we're kind of finding is the more we're able to sort of understand our son and actually make some accommodations and find that sweet spot, which is like, where is the challenge level in each different category? What's the level of accommodation needed? We're able to find slow, gradual progress where he's feeling well adjusted. But most importantly, I feel like he's actually being himself. He's not pretending to be well adjusted. He's
Mhm.
actually building some skills and he's still having a lot of challenges interfacing with society. But I would prefer that than he's going to school all day and he's completely pretending to be someone else and on the trajectory to burnout. A lot of kids on the spectrum around the age 9 and 10, you'll hear stories of them just completely bailing out of school and spending all day on their iPads because they just can't even function because they've been masking. So going back to the general population, I think the question within your question is it's like maybe one ingredient to an evolution of how we think about parenting and education is actually investing in deeply understanding the unique natures of our kids and not just trying to fit them into a square hole, but also if they're star shaped, celebrating the star shape. And like if they're a square with a little thing sticking out of the side that makes it hard to fit in that hole, to not just try to break that piece off so they fit in the hole, but to understand
Yeah.
a more goals-based approach around like what does this kid actually need and what do they not need. And so whether you use the language of reflexology or irisology, like I don't even know what that stuff is and I don't know, I'm skeptical, but
Good.
whatever your language might be. And so to go back to my language, like I really have a background in psychology and neuroscience and also mindfulness. For me, there's a lot of paying close attention to my son, especially in some of these challenging situations, asking really thought provoking questions, encouraging him to introspect on his emotional journey. Like if he's having trouble going to sleep, like what thoughts are going through your mind when you're trying to sleep? Like what are you noticing in your body? And like these can be really edgy questions for him because he doesn't like to go there. But even these little snippets of information he provides, my wife and I can kind of download and be like, and then we've been able to apply that to make a lot of skillful changes. And we've seen a lot of progress in that way. So the question within your question, hell yes.
Yeah, I hear you on the skepticism, and I am absolutely a skeptic, and that's why the main reason I even did that podcast episode and explored that particular method of science is like, okay, you just take a picture of my eye, and you can just tell me what's going on in my body and what health issues I might be susceptible to in my life or prone to. Like, I love the skeptic energy. Very much a skeptic myself. So
Yeah,
I'm
and to be fair, all the tools that we use start with skepticism. That's what I love
sure.
about science. It's like in the David Deutsch has this book. I forget what it's called now, but it's basically positions science as the pursuit of great explanations.
Mhm.
And like we both need our intuition and our belief systems, but also our skepticism
Sure.
because I think what we've discovered since the Renaissance is that just accepting people's explanation for something without question is an old way of thinking. And, unfortunately, it's coming back on online with social media
I
and
don't know
the
if it ever stopped,
skepticism.
really. I don't know if it ever stopped.
No, that's true. But like, if you go back in time and talk to the leading scientists in the proceedings of the National Academy of Science, writing some of the first groundbreaking publications in like basic chemistry, physics, and biology, they were hoping that the scientific way would continue to develop and become a better influence in our society. Going back to all the way like Copernicus and
Mhm.
Galileo, they were
Mhm.
like resisting the church in a way and saying like maybe we should take observations. I don't think they would have expected necessarily that like science would actually shape the entire world, like all this technology and the way we live our lives. Yet there would still be a massive contingency of people who are like resisting it, like
Yeah.
literally on their phones, which are completely scientific instruments, typing messages about how science is bullshit, right? So
Yeah. Yeah.
so there's something very interesting going on in that regard. And so I celebrate skepticism because it has led us to better explanations. And so just because something like irisology we can be skeptical of now doesn't mean it's not real. It
Sure.
just means we need to kind of look into it a little bit more, right?
Yeah, yeah. I think skepticism is healthy. I think that you should question things. You should be questioning everything. If somebody tells you something, taking it as the truth just because you want it to be the truth or because you don't have the energy to, poke holes in it or explore it. I think that's a recipe for disaster. Definitely, just taking on face value what anybody tells you, and what I thought you were coming to full circle to was just like the world that we live in, and we're being told things are a certain way, and then we're also getting information given to us that it's not that way actually, and in a lot of ways we've been lied to over and over. I mean, history. I mean, there's so many examples to get into that I don't think we need to name them all,
Yeah.
but yeah, I think skepticism is great, and I think we should be asking as many questions as possible about everything.
And I can close the loop on that right back into my situation because I think I told a little bit about what happened when our son was younger, but like right now, I am actively questioning a huge pillar of Western life and society in our family's journey, which is this kind of standard Western narrative of lifestyle, which is that the kids go to work, or sorry, the kids go to school, the parents go to work to support that. And then like we sort of come home, we go to extracurriculars, we kind of have like family dinner and these types of things. Whereas I'm in a situation where school's not really, really working. And if I'm serious about what I said earlier about not just forcing it to work and creating a masking, depressed, anxious child,
Mhm.
right? That means I have to like question my own career because that means I'm needed more at home, right? My wife has to question her like, pursuits. We have to think about that. We have to think about like what that means for our financial reality and therefore like this house that we live in, which is very much designed both from an economic and a general perspective to support that kind of lifestyle.
Mhm.
And so if we're questioning the basic like both parents work and the kids go to school and we do extracurriculars and we like travel to Mexico on the weekends or on the in the summer or sorry in the winter, like, if we're questioning that, then that actual rabbit hole goes pretty deep in terms of the pillars of modern lifestyle, and we're in the process right now of figuring that out because the pillar holding up that lifestyle is, like you said at the beginning of our conversation, childcare, right? That there is someone that we give our kid to and they take care. That's actually just not working for our child.
Right.
Therefore, all of these other assumptions have to be questioned. And so we're kind of like right now, you're talking to me like halfway through the process of like, what does that mean for us? I still don't know the answer, but we're actively questioning it.
Well, I think that's a beautiful segue to something I'd written down that I want to ask you about, which is how are you and your wife moving through that? In your the blog that I just read, you used the language lovingly but intense conversations about what do we do? What's next? We've got to figure something out. And I'm really curious to hear because I mean, as you know, like I spend my time mostly primarily with couples, people who are having difficulty communicating through things, helping them recognize these patterns, whether it be avoidance or passive aggression or, whatever things were modeled for them as a child that they're perpetuating onto their current adult relationships, these communication patterns. Like some people have a hard time having a conversation about like what they're going to do for vacation next month or what they're going to do for summer plans or just simple things that you need to come to an agreement with your partner, or moving. Where do we want to move to, or whatever? But this is like you're talking about a conversation of like we have to reimagine our entire structure in life. Like that's just a huge conversation that I think yeah can be very difficult if you don't have a healthy approach or tools or ways to regulate your emotions and you know um yeah, just healthy habits when it comes to communicating. So I'm really curious to hear, what do those conversations look like? Like, are they like intentional? Do you set up like a container and you're like, hey, all right, no phones, no screens, kids in bed or otherwise occupied, so we have privacy and we can really focus on this. Like, I'm just really curious to hear how you have those conversations. How do you structure that, and what do they look like?
Yeah, I think even with the tools, they're still very difficult conversations. So like
Sure.
I think we are skillfully using a lot of tools of good communication. I think there's a couple of levels to this that we've worked through. The base level, as you alluded to, is like we are under an extreme amount of demand, right? Our kid has a ton of demand on us. Our lifestyle currently has a ton of demand. And so treading water represents not blaming each other. That's like step one,
Very
right?
good.
Like
Yeah.
this week is actually, we're going through a bit of a, my wife is having a lot of challenges this week. I was having a lot of challenges 2 weeks ago. Like, the kind of sometimes we both have a lot of challenges. Sometimes one of us is doing good, and sometimes we're both actually kind of finding peace with it. But in any of those circumstances, when you're really depleted, given that we're kind of in this insular family unit working through these challenges, it can be really easily to get into blaming your partner and blaming your kid, really. But like, blaming your partner can be a big obstacle. So, one example of that would be what we call the tit for tat conversation, which we've given that name intentionally as like a cutesification of a pattern that every parent can relate to, which is like, I did this, you're not pulling your weight. right? Like, oh, I took the garbage out yesterday. I had the kid this morning, and now it's your turn. And like, where are you? And like, why aren't you parenting? Why am I stuck parenting? And it's like, you're not doing enough. And so that conversation is inevitable. But like, what we've kind of established as a norm for us is that the tit for tat feeling is rarely accurate and it's rarely helpful. And so the tit for tat thing is something that we have to deal with within ourselves. So if I am like, oh my gosh, she's not doing enough, I'm doing too much, like I'm overburdened, I need help or whatever, my approach is not going to be to like march over to her and be like, you're not doing enough. That would be a kind of failing of our agreement. Our agreement is for me to be like, hold on, I need to do the work to like resolve this emotion. I'm overwhelmed. I need to go take a break for myself. I need to see clearly, etc. Now, the cornerstone of the tit for tat, this strategy, is you have to have a kind of trust and a belief that we're both doing our best.
Hmm.
This doesn't work if truly you're kind of like your partner is a deadbeat who's just like smoking weed and playing video games all day while you do all the work. You can't really have a healthy, like, I'm just gonna like take care of it myself. Like that's an injustice at that point. You have to do something about that. But we firmly believe that we're both doing our best within our capacity. We have different strengths. I am not as good at cleaning as she is. And she sort of has to do the work of being like, well, he's doing his best. It's not like he's doing no cleaning. He's doing his best. I am kind of really good at organizing things and doing finances and stuff. And so I have to kind of be like, this is something. And that speaks to kind of a second strategy, which is like we kind of play to our strengths. When it comes to getting above that treading water and having these deep conversations, I think another thing that we've learned, especially like, our son is neurodivergent and it kind of makes us look in the mirror and be like, well, there's some things that are kind of neurodivergent about us and about our parents and about our families. And like, it's not, the apple doesn't fall far from the tree. The science is pretty clear. This stuff is genetic. Um, I can put it in a tongue in cheek way, which is like, none of us are the quarterback of the football team in our families. Like, that's not the, you know what I mean? Like, you definitely like, we all like math a lot and it's like, it's just different. And so I think there's something where we have to learn each other's operating systems a little bit and learn about when is the right time to have that conversation. I think in a simpler time, we had done things like scheduled check-ins, like you described, like a container. We used like nonviolent communication frameworks and had like structured conversations. But now with this heavy burden on us, it's actually like not great to schedule things because you just simply can't guarantee that you have the right energy for that conversation because our days are such a roller coaster. So it's actually more about like consent, about like, hey, is the energy good for us to maybe talk about school stuff later today or right now? And like, I personally am really bad at this. This is something I'm working on. Like, I love to talk, hence I'm on a podcast talking for a while. So like, it's really easy for me to just like walk in while we're in the kitchen and just be like, so should we question every fundamental thing about our lifestyle while like I'm halfway doing the dishes or something? And she's like, I can't process that right now. Like, we can't have that conversation, right? Like, so I have to be really careful about being like, do you have the energy to have a good conversation? And then I also have to be careful about like talking too much and overloading her. And then sort of she has to be careful complimentary wise is that like I do like social connection. And so she can be more introverted and we can be having a conversation like this and maybe she doesn't respond as much or give me enough feedback and I feel like I'm being ignored or having a one-way conversation. So all of this to say understanding each other's communication styles and patterns and finding those opportune moments to have those conversations. And when we do kind of do all that, everything I just described, we're not blaming each other. We're in a kind of positive place. Even if we're overwhelmed, we're not pointing it at each other. And then we're finding the right time to have that conversation, even the right format to have that conversation. Then we can actually get into a flow of like really getting into some of the deeper issues. So we're still figuring it out, but these are some of the things that I've learned.
Yeah, those are great. And there's several of the things you mentioned are very specific tools that I teach people actively. So that's wonderful. I loved hearing the word consent coming up. Such an important aspect to communicating with someone. And then also just I think of all the things that you mentioned, I think one of the most impactful for anyone listening who maybe is running into issues with being able to have difficult conversations or even just like the pattern or the yeah, I guess it is a pattern of like I want to bring this thing up because this is an issue or something, a concern that I have. But when I bring it up, it's not received. It's always a fight, or, I say, hey, I need more of this from you. And they're like, well, I've done this. And so like, you don't actually ever maybe feel heard in the specific thing that you're trying to get to. And the example that you gave of like, you know, I feel like they're not doing enough because I need this to be done and it's not, or this is, a need that I have. Like, cut out the first part, focus on the second part. You have a need. Like,
Yeah.
focus on what's in your domain, what your experience is. And then from there, you can ask for, you to be supported in the way that you need, which I'm sure, most of the time your partner's going to be at least open to hearing something that you're needing. But if you, frame it in a way of you're not doing enough, or what you're doing is wrong or whatever, like, you can almost guarantee a defensive response. Almost
Yeah.
guarantee it, unless the other person is very mindful and very aware of their reactions and communication styles and communication patterns and things like that. Like, even if they are, it's very likely that if you're opening the conversation with criticism, it's going to be received defensively, and ultimately whatever your request is or the need that you're trying to bring attention to, it's going to be completely missed, because you're going to spend all of your time arguing or communicating about the accusation that the person perceived you to be making about what they're doing, or judgment or criticism or whatever. So I think that's really great.
What would you say for someone how to receive that? Like, I think that's like a really thing that we've been working on. I have some thoughts on it, but you're the
Yeah.
expert in this area. It's like, when someone else is coming at you with that energy, like given what we both discussed and kind of know that like you can have a pit in the hole of your stomach. And one of the natural human responses to that is you don't want to face it. So you go and you blame. You say, okay, like, look, I've been working too hard. I'm not taking enough breaks. I'm overwhelmed.
Hmm.
So I'm going to go to my partner and be like, how come you never do the dishes? Right. It's just
Right.
like,
Right.
it's a human response. And so in that scenario, what are your recommendations for the partner who's just biding their time in the kitchen and then their partner comes in and says, how come you never do the dishes in this aggressive way?
Yeah.
What's the jujitsu there? What's the aikido to like redirect that energy?
Yeah, I think if it's accessible, which is a muscle that you can build over time, I believe that the best thing that you can do if you're the receiver of that communication is reflection.
Hmm.
Truly reflect it back. I hear you saying that I'm the reason that your needs aren't being met. I hear
Yeah.
you saying that because I don't do enough, this is what you're feeling. Is that and then the most important part about the reflection, and that it doesn't get talked about enough, is confirming that you are reflecting correctly. Is that what you're saying to me? Because so often we feel a certain way or we think a certain thing, but the way we deliver it is not how we meant it. Maybe our emotions are involved, or, something in it just twists how we're presenting our truth in a way that it really isn't even our truth. And if it were reflected back to us and we had a chance to hear it, oh, you're saying, I hear, like, when I'm telling you that I need support, what you're hearing is that it's your fault and you're not doing enough. Like, hearing that back sometimes can help that person be like, no, 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 that's not what I mean. What I mean is, and now you're having a conversation which is focused on understanding what that person is trying to communicate versus defending your experience or your reality. Or again, it feels, often feels like an accusation. Blame is an accusation to the nervous system.
Yeah.
And so it's really hard to fight that response. But if you can just get clarity, be curious. I'm hearing you say this. Is that really what you're like telling me right now? Is I'm the reason? It's my fault? Does
Yeah.
that feel true for you? I think that can cut the conflict immediately and stop it from happening. But maybe that is their truth. Maybe it's like, yes, actually, yes, you are not doing enough.
Mhm.
And it is the reason that this is happening. And at least then you really are hearing their truth. But the most common thing that people run into is they don't ask for clarity, and they just make assumptions about what that person meant. And now they have a story in their mind of the other person's experience. And now they're moving in two different directions,
Right.
and they're not sharing the same reality anymore. So how could you possibly talk about what's going on when you're living over here and they're living over here? Like, it's really a damaging pattern that people run into.
Yeah, that's really interesting. What we've found typically, at least in our relationship is that vulnerability can be like a really open access point to like
Hmm.
shift the tone. So like when we get into a sort of conflict situation, now it usually takes this pattern of like heated emotions, and then it kind of cracks. One of us tends to like crack it with some vulnerability, and then it kind of settles into a very amicable, healing conversation, like just in the moment. And when we were younger, that used to be like the next day. Like we would get into the fight and then we would stew for 24 hours and
Hmm.
then we'd like have a moment. But now it happens immediately. Like that's, we've kind of leveled up that skill where someone might come in swinging. And then what I tend to find, at least on my end, is like a vulnerable admission of what's really going on for me will tend to deflate the tone. Like, whoa, I'm feeling super attacked right now. I mean, I'm like happy to figure out the dishes thing, but like you have just come in here and I'm not sure what to handle. I'm feeling defensive. I'm feeling hostile. I found myself like about to like list all the things I've done today and to defend myself. And I'm like, I don't know if we want to go there. Like things like that will help
Yeah.
kind of bring the temperature down. But the other thing that has really helped us is that like in a calmer moment, we've had those conversations and come up with that tit for tat language so that in that moment I can be like, I'm feeling like a tit for tat energy here.
Hmm.
And like that harkens back to conversations we've had about how that energy is very often not productive. And like, you know what I mean? So like there is something kind of there that, I think just extremely valuable in how you communicate in high emotion scenarios with vulnerability to kind of bring the temperature down.
Yeah, I think introspection is very great. I think the ability to be able to speak to your experience in that way of this is I feel this coming up in me. Like saying it out loud is so impactful because the other person doesn't know.
Yeah.
Like you can never know the other person's internal experience. And so to be able to hear it, if there's love and care in you for that person, hearing that they're feeling overwhelmed and, anxious or feeling attacked, like there's going to be a part of you that's like, oh, that's not what I want. I don't
Yeah.
want you feeling that way. Right. And so at least it brings your attention to it rather than the way most people have had this modeled is, the way to bring attention to the fact that you feel attacked is to defend yourself from attack. You know what I mean? Like that's
Totally.
the response. If you're being attacked, defend. Don't say, "Hey, I'm feeling attacked." Like, no, like that for whatever reason, that's not a logical thing that people are being taught as children. And that's the other thing too about the vulnerability. Like, I don't know what I would love to hear about your childhood and whether this was something that was encouraged or not. But I know for the majority of my clients, including myself, my partner, pretty much everyone that I know personally, as children, vulnerability was not encouraged.
Yeah.
It's weak. You being vulnerable, no, that's weakness. You need to be strong. You need to pretend like oh, you fell, scrape it off, man. Rub some dirt on it. Like just keep moving. Sticks and stones break bones. Words don't hurt. That's not true. Words
Yeah.
can be incredibly hurtful, but like we've been conditioned to not speak to our vulnerabilities and not be honest when we're feeling sad or if something hurt our feelings because that's soft or weak or whatever. But like everyone's experiencing it. There's no
Mhm.
people that don't get their feelings hurt or, you know what I mean? Like, so, but for whatever reason, we've been conditioned that it's not okay or that it's undesirable to admit it. It's
Yeah.
shameful to admit that you're vulnerable. And so, yeah, I'm curious about your childhood and like, how's your experience been with being vulnerable and that being acceptable and something that you feel safe to communicate openly?
Yeah, that rings very true. I wrote this line in the book, which was sticks and stones can break your bones, but words can trigger your nervous system.
Yeah,
It's just sort of like,
that's good. Yeah.
let's just remix it for the reality of the situation.
Yeah.
It's not words are not going to break your bones.
Sure.
That's true. But they are going to trigger your nervous system. And yeah, I very much had that. I think I typically think we all have kind of experienced that to some degree. I also just kind of personally have a sense that men in particular,
Right.
or those who are raised as men and boys,
Especially.
have a very extreme version of that.
Right.
Like, which is like, I think something, for the men in your life and the men in your listeners' lives is something to always remember that like we have all the emotions. It's not like we don't have emotions. They're all in there somewhere.
Yep.
And if you have a sense that the men in your life don't have as many emotions, that just means they're pretty bottled up. And that's just kind of how we're raised. And I think it has been a very eye opening journey into adulthood where I've kind of embraced more and more vulnerability and actually seen that it is a vital skill for good relationships and even for career and all these like things. Um, And so it just seems kind of misguided to not teach young people. And for my son's case, like he's got some challenges, but one of the silver linings here is it's kind of forced him to be very introspective because like as I mentioned earlier, we're very often like, buddy, you need to let us know what's going on with you. And he's actually developing quite a sophisticated language for emotion
Mm.
because he has
Right,
to
yeah, out of
communicate in a
necessity
very
almost.
specific way what is going on, especially when it's like not to us, to his teacher or something. He has to be like, I'm dysregulated, I'm overwhelmed, or I'm feeling like anger. And he kind of has to do that. And I think that since we have found, like my wife and I are both, my wife also is into meditation for a long time. And like, um, you know, since we have found so much value with that, we have tried to pass that on. And like when you were talking a little bit about it in the context of a relationship, I had this memory of like a time that my wife did that in the middle of a conflict that just left my jaw on the floor. Like we were fighting about something. This is years ago. And I'm just coming at her full force, trying to like argue why she's wrong and why I'm right or whatever,
Win the argument, yeah.
win the argument and like prove that, her perspectives are dumb and whatever, right? And I'm just like, I'm all ready to like dive into the next level of the argument.
Mhm.
And she sort of paused for a second and she said, I'll never forget it. She was like, I'm feeling really hostile to you right now. And anything you say to me, I'm going to fight you on.
Mm.
And I was like, well, you can't argue with that. I was just sort of
Right,
like,
yeah,
anything I say, of course, it immediately dawned on me as like not a tactic, but the actual absolute truth. Like, that's the thing that people underestimate vulnerability is that human beings are also really good at recognizing vulnerability. Like, when I share something real that's going on for me, like, I have been doing on this podcast, we're not like close friends that spend every day, but like you can tell that I'm telling you what's really going on because why would someone come on a podcast and be like, hey, I've got a real big challenge with my son and my life's falling apart, right? Like no one would, but if I came on and was like, yeah, everything's all buttoned up, my job's going great, everything's
yeah,
going great, then you'd be more, skeptical as we talked
sure,
about, like, oh, okay, is this really what's happening? And so there's a real power to vulnerability in that way because it's almost unapologetic truth.
sure.
And in a world where, like, not to get political, but where the story and the spin is getting so out of hand, now AI is putting slop everywhere. Vulnerability is even more valuable because it's like unapologetic truth. And it
And
can
when
be
we're
incredibly
being a
powerful.
human.
Yeah, it's fundamentally human. So
Yeah.
it can be incredibly powerful in relationship, in career, in parenting, and all of these scenarios that we talked about.
Yeah, I think that's great. I love that example, about her just cutting that conversation with, "Here's my truth. Here's what I'm experiencing right now." And like you said, there is no arguing it, and that's kind of the bigger picture is, like, if you speak to your experience only, they can't argue with you. There's nothing to argue because it's your experience and you're having it. Whether someone else thinks you should be having it or they're having a different one, none of that is really relevant because it is your experience and you're entitled to one. And so again, we're talking like in the framework of anybody listening, who are running into these things, like, when in doubt, speak to your experience only, because
Mhm.
there's nothing to argue. There can only be, "Oh, well, I hear that's what you're experiencing," or maybe that brings up feelings in me that you're experiencing this, and that's valid too. But you can't be wrong for having an experience, no matter what it is. Um, and that's, I mean, when in doubt, speak to your experience as much as you can.
Yeah, and if it's a relationship you value, then when you start to understand another person's experience, you start to adapt your approach. And that's how
Hmm.
people grow closer and more effective. And
Right.
that's been our experience, right? One thing that I mentioned a little bit earlier is that my wife and I have this dynamic where I can talk and talk, and she can get kind of, okay, okay, enough, right? Like I get the point, right? And sometimes the way she does that is she'll start to like do other things while I'm talking. And then I can get in this cycle of feeling like, oh, you're not listening to me. And then we can get into kind of this loop. But we've actually like identified that very clearly as not her fault or my fault.
Hmm.
It is just an energetic pattern that we can get into because of our nervous systems and the way we're wired. And so when we take it in a non blaming way, we can all of a sudden like access much more skilled approaches. Like, hey, why don't we have this conversation going for a walk? Because we're doing something with our bodies. We feel like we're engaged. We don't feel, it feels like there's a 20-minute time allotment here. There's a sense of how long it's going to be. And that motivates me to be briefer. But it also, gives her a sense that there's going to be an end to this conversation. And, there isn't like, the little chores around the house to do while we're talking, which can, it's just like a,
Yeah,
a smart solution for us.
I
Right.
agree.
And it's totally grounding from not only self-understanding, but the willingness to understand your partner and to not come from a place of blame. And like when the going gets rough, the opportunities for blame just start to escalate. Like, and it's the stereotypical relationship falling apart narrative from any movie or sitcom where it's just like it goes from I'm feeling overwhelmed to and like I need something to you're not doing enough to you never do enough.
Mm,
And then it's all bets are off, right?
yeah, gloom and doom for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think this is a conversation that's very present and applicable in my current experience here. Not with, thankfully, not with my wife or with my child, but this pattern continues to resurface of other people in my life who, um, when it comes to blame or like deflection of responsibility,
Mm,
right? Like, or accountability. It's not my fault. I'm not in any way responsible for anything. It's all someone else. It's someone else's fault. It's someone else's responsibility or whatever. But it's that there's this almost like desperation in this pattern of like, whoa, not me. No, 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 no. I didn't do anything. Um, and my curiosity, because I can't speak to exactly where that comes from, but based on my experience and my curiosities and skepticisms and all the things that make up my mind, like I see and I believe there's a direct correlation between that pattern and whatever your mind associated as a child with doing something wrong, getting in trouble. What does that mean? And what patterns did you develop as a child to deflect any blame or responsibility so you could avoid whatever consequence you associated with being wrong, doing, you should have done this, but you didn't. And so because of that, there's something unknown, whatever it is, but you already have this pattern in you that's established of, oh, I think they're saying I did something wrong, or I think they're saying that I'm going to get in trouble here, so I'm going to do whatever I need to do to get away from that, to avoid that outcome. And that's a super common pattern that I see in my clients as well as people in my life. And again, introspection, understanding yourself, be aware of those patterns. Hey, speak to it. Hey, I feel like I'm about to get in trouble right now. I feel like you're saying that I'm wrong for what I did or my decision. And because of that, there's a consequence or there's something that's going to happen to me, an undesirable consequence to this. That I'm really feeling like a strong impulse to avoid that or, deflect that I've done anything wrong because of what I perceive to be, the outcome of that.
I think you're speaking, it's closing the loop. I know we're almost at time here, but it's like coming back into parenting because you're absolutely right, right? Our relationship to those experiences really stems from habit patterns we've built since our childhood and onward. And depending on how we were raised, not only do we have a certain relationship to like being perceived as doing something wrong or making a mistake, where if we were parented in a way where we were scolded for that, or the consequences were severe, or anger was dumped on us, or other things, then we kind of operate in the world with this sense that we should never make a mistake. We
Right.
should never be wrong. And if we do make a mistake, it's a serious problem. And therefore, we do things like trying to deflect our mistakes, trying to blame others, trying to hide. Also, though, we also internalize that strategy. We also say, oh, not only should I not try to look into this and admit fault, I've also seen my whole life an example of how to avoid fault, which is to dump my anger on other people and
Hmm.
to point out their flaws and draw severe consequences. But then the opposite is also true. We can learn from that, and we can say, like with our son, what we try to do is you can feel that, like, if he's pushing all our buttons, I've definitely, like, he can make, I'm not a very angry person, but he can make me angry in a way that no human being can. Um, but you can see that tendency to want to dump the anger on this unsuspecting child who,
Mhm.
like, spilt his drink or whatever, which is totally what you would expect a child to do. This is a mistake that is completely developmentally appropriate for a child to
Mhm.
spill their drink on the couch. But to sort of dump that anger is to actually blame the child for being a child.
Right.
And you're not only creating that pattern, that perpetuating that cycle of another generation of human beings who don't want to take accountability for anything. You're also teaching them that this is how you deal with problems. The inverse is also true, which is, let's just take the juice spilling on the couch as an innocuous example, which is like a simple question like, "Oh, what happened?" Like, "Oh, we'll clean it up." My wife's really good at this. She'll just be like, "Oh, don't worry, we'll clean it up. Let's come and help clean it up." Like, get a rag, not a trace of anger, not even worried about the couch. Like, let's just clean it up together. And like, what happened? How did it fall? And then he might be like, well, I wasn't paying attention because I was watching TV. And it's like, you don't even have to add the like, well, you should pay attention next time because they know. They said
Mm.
that. He was like, I wasn't paying attention. Lesson learned. And now you got to help clean up, which nobody wants to do. And so that lesson's kind of learned. And like, you multiply that by 100 through years and years, and you have the inverse pattern, which is you have an adult who isn't afraid of making a mistake, isn't trying to deflect their errors by judging and blaming people. And we all know people like that, people who are generous with their spirit. And yeah, that's I think what you've spoken to is not only like something you can introspect and look in within yourself and where your patterns come from, but you can very clearly, like, I almost have this image in my mind of like the generational loop from generate the way this stuff has been handed down for thousands of years, and that we're just the next node on the loop, and like we're not going to solve it. We're not, like, sorry, we're not going to solve it, but can we at least untangle the loop a little bit
Mhm.
more for ourselves than for our parents, and can we untangle it a little bit more for our kids? That's all we can do. That's all we can do.
Yeah. No, I agree 100%. Yeah, I think helping the child or helping anyone recognize that mistakes are not only expected, but they're necessary. If you think about growth, if you think about learning a new skill or perfecting a skill of any kind, you're gonna mess up. You're gonna do it wrong. Like my son is loving piano. He's I mean, I wake up every morning. I wake up and I go and I peek in his room because when I was a kid, I would be looking to do something if my parents were asleep. I'd be probably looking to be doing something that I wasn't normally allowed to do. This would be an opportunity to like get
Mhm.
on a screen or like watch a little bit of TV or whatever, eat something out of the, the fridge that I'm not supposed to,
Right.
whatever. Meanwhile, I walk in and I'm like peek into his room. I didn't even get to his room before I hear him he's just playing piano. He's just in there playing piano. And so, but like this is something he's intrinsically motivated to do. He wants to play piano. He wants to get better at piano and practice. And he was doing 30-minute lessons. I want hour-long lessons. Like, okay, all right, like
Mm.
we'll support it. But then see these patterns of like, oh, like I can't get it right, or I messed up the song or whatever, and it's just like, but just keep doing it.
Mhm.
Keep doing it. It's okay. You'll get better over time. It's okay to not be good at something. Like, and I don't know if there's a book. It's probably, but like something of like you're gonna suck at it. Like, learn to be okay with sucking at something. You're not gonna be good. You're gonna be bad at it.
Yeah.
But then you just keep doing it. And then you improve and you kind of come to terms with like, yeah, I'm not great at playing guitar. I just started playing 2 weeks ago. You thought you were just gonna be freaking Jimi Hendrix because you really like it. It takes time and you're gonna mess up chords. You're gonna do whatever. That's part of learning. That's part of the learning curve is getting it wrong, messing things up, making mistakes. And if they're afraid of making mistakes or they shame themselves for making mistakes, they're gonna quit. They're
Yeah.
gonna not push for these things that they may really want to do because of this pattern.
And the loop, I think, comes from those things where you make a lot of mistakes, the feeling of finally getting it. I mean,
Yeah.
that is human bliss, right? Like when you finally, I'm a musician myself, like when I could finally play classical gas,
Mm,
especially that part where it goes up high and it's like, da 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 whatever. Like when I finally got it, it was like, oh my gosh, like it took me 6 months or something to figure that out, but it felt incredible. And I've been doing that with our son with chess, where
mm,
he loved the patterns in the game of chess. And very quickly, I mean, I started teaching him chess when I started to realize his brain was the kind of brain it was. Cause I'm
yeah.
like, I know a few people with brains like this and they love chess. So I started showing him chess and he loved the patterns. He loved the game. He picked it up quickly, but he hated losing. Like it was an
Mm,
emotional meltdown. And so I very easily could have been like, well, I'm going to whoop you and you're going to lose and you're going to feel that because that's life, kid. Right.
mhm,
If I had done that, which we've done in other contexts, he just would have given up. He would have stopped playing chess. It would have been too emotionally overwhelming for him at that point. So I said, listen, we're going to play easy mode where I'm letting you win because I know you love the game and we want to kind of find that joy. Last year, at some point, I started talking about kind of like letting him get used to losing. And I framed it like a skill. I was like, losing is a skill that you need to work on. Like, you need to work on your tactical positioning and you need to work on losing. Those are the two chess skills you need to work on right now. Right.
yeah,
And then we kind of agreed that we would do it as a New Year's resolution. We talked about it. I told him, like, I got it. I introspected with him, like, what is it about losing that's so overwhelming? And he was really hard for him to communicate, but I got a whiff of like embarrassment. I got a whiff of like, I feel like, and like anyone who's played chess, like when you lose, you feel dumb. That's just what
yeah,
happened. You just feel stupid, right? So got a sense of that, and I was like, I can relate to that. So that gave me some purchase, and I was like, here's what we'll do: we're gonna go into the chess app, and we're gonna play the easiest bots, and we're gonna like play more bots until you reach the point where you're losing. So you're definitely going to win on the first few. And he was like, I'm too scared. I don't want to play the first ones because they're going to beat me because I'm not good enough. And I'm like, I think you're going to be good enough, but if they beat you, that's the skill kind of we're working on, right? And I could tell he was more open to it because there wasn't going to be a human on the other side of the board.
mm,
But anyway, he starts playing. He beats the 250 level bots a few times, and then at one point the 250 beats him, has a huge emotional meltdown as expected. But that's the point, as expected. And I was
right.
like, see, that was it. That was the feeling. That's it. And look, it's 15 minutes later and we're feeling okay, right? And you know what? Let's go get revenge on that bot. Like, and then he went and we like played the bot and he beat it. And then I drew his attention to the fact that like how much better does your
Mm,
fifth win feel compared to your first, second, and third?
because of the loss.
Because of the loss, and he
Yeah,
noticed that, and then I was like, "What lesson did you learn? Be careful with your queen," was the first lesson
yeah,
that we wrote it down, like and so now he's, like, climbing the bots. Every time he loses, it's an opportunity to write down a lesson,
mm,
and it's a chance to get revenge, and the next one is gonna be an even more exciting win, and now he's playing 800,000 level bots, which is, like, kind of the bots that I play, like but, like, the challenge for this particular brain was not learning the rules of chess and the
yeah,
complexity of the game. It was actually the emotional challenge. Whereas another kid might be like having to learn the complexity of the game, but have no problem with the emotional. And it goes back to what we said before about kids being different and requiring education in different areas.
mhm,
But I think it really underlines not only do you got to learn to make mistakes, but there's a kind of carrot that you can dangle because when you master something that you've been making mistakes on, the feeling is so much better than just playing easy mode all the time.
sure. I think the thing that I'm hearing that is most, I don't know, standing out to me is that you're structuring it in a way where he's getting it's an intrinsic reward. A lot of parents, a lot of schooling programs, and there's a book called Punished by Rewards by Alfie Kohner, if you're familiar.
Yeah.
Incredible book. Anyone that hasn't read it, please read it. But it goes into these examples of like in school where it's like the reader program, like read so many books and you get free pizza a day or whatever. And all of these like different like little, oh, have a piece of chocolate every time you get something right, or whatever, these little outside influences of like motivation. And what they show is that extrinsic motivation is great in a short term, but it's terrible in a long term. It doesn't actually motivate them to want to do the thing. They just want the thing you're giving them for doing it. And so, like with the reading and pizza party example, the studies have shown, and the data shows that the children read shorter books, so they could read more, so that
Right.
they could get to the prize faster.
Smart
And
kid.
then ultimately, yeah, exactly, right? I mean, kids are adaptable, man. You put it in there, they're gonna figure out the way
Yeah,
that
they
serves
will.
them the best. But that they and also most of the kids in those programs didn't really read for fun anymore.
Yeah.
Ones that used to like reading, it wasn't really about reading anymore. It was about this other thing. Whereas in this example, instead of giving the kid, oh, you won, yeah, you did chess, you won the game, here's a piece of chocolate, or,
Yeah.
whatever, like it's not about that. It's about inside of himself. He can control or not control his experience, but he can modify his experience by, you know, trying harder and going and like understanding what went wrong in the last game and modify his approach so that he can get this reward within himself, which is feeling that whatever he's feeling, validation, excitement, whatever. But like it's about him, it's not about anything outside of him. So it's, you know what I mean, it's just so subtle, but what a great approach.
You know what's funny is that, one of the biggest rewards for him is an extra 15 minutes of video games. And we actually told him that for the first 3 times that he lost, he could get an extra 15 minutes of video games,
Mm,
but after the feeling passed, right? Like, no,
yeah,
we're not gonna distract ourselves from the
sure,
feeling. So it's
right.
sort of like a combination because you're right. Like, in fact, I don't know if this is the intention of the title, you said punished by rewards or whatever, but it was like, instead of rewarding winning, we were actually rewarding resilience. We were
Hmm.
rewarding like the fact that you like got out there and played a harder bot that and you were scared and you were brave and you went and played and you knew that there was a chance you would lose. And if you did, you knew you were going to have an emotional outburst that felt out of control. I'm going to reward that extrinsically
Mm,
because that's like the resilience and the ethic to kind of the bravery to face
yeah,
that is something that like you know, should be rewarded. At the same time, we're not going to use the reward to distract ourselves from the feeling. Like we do
right.
need
Yeah.
to let the feeling pass. We're not going to hide in our video games so we don't have to feel sad that we lost the chess, right? So,
Yeah.
yeah, it
Consume all
is
the
interesting to think
dopamine.
of it
Yeah.
that way. Yeah, I
Yeah.
love it.
Yeah, that's great, man. I love it. I'd love. I mean, like you said, we're getting close to time, and so I think this is a pretty great place to stop for today's conversation. But I mean, yeah, as always, great. I love having these conversations with you. I appreciate your perspectives and your approaches, and yeah, would love to do it again, man. Any final thoughts or anything, typically with this, the Do You Feel Heard podcast, we close with like, the whole world's listening. You can reach every person on the planet with this message. What message do you have for them? Do you have anything coming up as far as maybe for parents, for anyone with a child who's um yeah, maybe, like you're saying, neurodivergent or even just in general. Anything for parents out there? Anything you have?
The thing that's coming up for me is, we talked a lot about kids in general and neurodivergent kids and typical kids, learning to be more aware. And I think the thing that's coming up for me is the idea of teaching a kid to meditate is like totally, it feels impossible that they're going to sit there for 30 minutes. But to make awareness, like self awareness, kind of playful is a very powerful approach because kids love to play. And so, what I might encourage any parent out there that I've found a lot of traction with is to find little games that encourage self awareness or awareness of your environment, right? Like I Spy is an example of a game where you pay attention to the colors in your world, right? It's like it's a visual clarity exercise. So, what does I Spy for emotions look like? How do we make that a fun game? Like where you're training your child to be self aware and find the right word for how they're feeling. I think that's an untapped potential in the education system that we didn't touch on. It's also an untapped potential in parenthood. It's like, how do we make emotional self-awareness fun and playful and a natural part of like human skill development because that to me is the foundational root of the kind of vulnerability we talked about in a lot of this podcast.
Outstanding. Yeah, that's a great answer, and maybe we'll jump back on here and talk about how we do that. How do we make that fun, and how do we present these opportunities to children? Because I agree with you. It's certainly an invaluable skill and, thing to be able to do for yourself and for others, and how you interact with them is understand what's going on inside of you and be able to speak to it in a way that's vulnerable and, honest about what you're experiencing, not so much what others have done to create that experience inside of you.
Yeah, I spy with my proprioception a sensation that is tense.
Yeah, if your 7-year-old and my 9-year-old can speak that way, we're really knocking it out of the park, man.
Absolutely. Okay, man, this was great. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thanks so much for coming back on. Thanks everyone for showing up and listening, and, until next time, thank you.
All right, cheers.
This has been the Do You Feel Heard podcast. If you're interested in resources that will help you move through conflict, you can go to doyoufeelheard.com, where we have tools for individuals and couples.